Hello, Mike.
Hello, Mohit.
Good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Doing well.
Fantastic, fantastic. Good. So it's 1 minute to 7:30. We'll wait for a few minutes. There are already friends joining in. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Good to see you all here. You could say hello on the chat if you like. And Mike, people are joining in really fast. So we'll give them.
Nice to see Yogesh joining us again. About time you joined us in person somewhere, Yogesh.
Yes.
And Pramod too.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome, Mike. Welcome, Bubo Birding, to this platform. I must tell you that I just figured out that I have an owl here. Look, see, Mike, is it a Bubo?
It's very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Okay.
maybe a hawk owl, brown hawk owl, I think.
Perhaps a knockout. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you, friends, for joining us. And I'm going to wait for another minute or so before I get started. The goal of this webinar is to bring uh, all those experiences, information about birds and wildlife in some key hotspots of Rajasthan. Talk about conservation, talk about birding experiences, talk about people, landscape, rural tourism, address the issues of stakeholders from time to time and how important this entire ecosystem is. So this is the goal of this webinar. And there could be a person better than Mike who is the expert, the birding expert, I'd say. Very few people on this planet who possess this sort of knowledge and are so dedicated to the cause of birding, and appreciate the fact that birds are larger than life. For me, I hold it very high in my thought process that birds are larger than life. They do a lot for us behind the scenes, which we are sometimes not noticing. My idea of looking at birds is that they're not objects. They're not just species that one would tick off. They're not just items to store in photographs and things like that. Idea is that to understand the spiritual nature of this particular community of life, this life form on this planet, and appreciate what they're doing for all of us here and everything else. So this is how I look at birding. So this was a little bit of emotional stuff, and let me just sort of start with introducing Mike here. But before I do that, I just want people to write in the chat if I am audible properly or if it's echoing, if I need to do something to my vocal cords or my ears or something like that. So if you're okay with that, just type yes, and if you're not okay with that, type no. So I know how the sound quality is. Okay, yes. Amit says yes. Great. So many people are saying yes. So I'm good to go. Thank you. So this is about Mike. Ever since his childhood in England, Mike has been fascinated with watching birds and recording and documenting bird sightings. Mike lived in Delhi in the year 2002. He was a very active member of Delhi Bird Club then, and also contributed to the Atlas of Birds of Delhi and Haryana. After he moved to Bangalore, he got interested in exploring those sites that weren't visited so frequently. He worked for Bird Count India to help promote Indian birding and especially high quality data recording. He's an eBird reviewer for India. So all your questions regarding eBird, you can ask him. His interest in bird recording and migration led to a short-term assignment of running the BTO's Bird Track program. Each week, he would check the BBC weather pages to find out whether what the weather has been like in Britain, so he could write an article discussing recent bird occurrences. So, Mike, hats off to you, and you've come a long way, and you've contributed a lot. Thank you very much. I'm greatly pleased and honored that you're here. May I talk a bit about myself, especially for those people who don't know me? I'm Mohit Agarwal, and I'm blessed with 4 children, a son and a daughter, and 2 non-humans. One is a Labrador, and the other was an escapee African grey. I'm a follower of Shiva. Professionally, I'm an experiential ecotourism specialist with deep love for nature. I help people travel to some wonderful places in Asia. I'm the founder of Asian Adventures, a 26-year-old travel company. It is the largest and #1 bird watching tour company in India. The company is on a large mission to help Asian elephants with their corridors, free the Himalayas of plastic waste, and help small wildlife NGOs, and also save the ancient Himalayan shrines. That's where spiritualism happens. My interest is to promote ecotourism in the real sense and convert every tourist to an ecotourist. I hope that happens. So, Mike, this was about you, and this was about me, and we've got a whole lot of friends here attending this webinar. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, once again. And I'm going to hand over the mic to Mike. Okay, Mike, you go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mohit.
Over to you.
Okay, welcome again, everybody. It's nice to have so many people here. It's actually a time of year when we should be in Rajasthan, and hopefully some of our foreign friends who are on the call here would have been people who would have been traveling with us now, because January, February is perfect time to be traveling around birds and seeing birds in Rajasthan. So we initially thought what we'll do on this presentation is take you through Rajasthan and Gujarat, so the sort of best of the birds of West India. But when we started looking at that, we just realized that there's just far too much. You can't do one state justice in just an hour anyway, let alone 2. So we're going to have a little bit of a race through Rajasthan here. But we're not even going to do all of Rajasthan, because we decided, I'm sure you all know lots about Bharatpur and Ranthambore, for example. So we're going to leave those out and do some of the other bits that maybe people don't know quite so well. Okay, so let me just start the presentation, which hopefully you can see that. And of course, the cover bird there is the big, literally big star of Rajasthan birding. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the western end of Rajasthan. But assuming that we're starting at the other end, from Delhi, for example, we'll get there via a few other places along the way. So Rajasthan, as many of you will know, it's in the northwest of India. It's the largest state in India since the breakup of Uttar Pradesh into Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand. And it's got a rich history. It's actually the sort of place where you can't it's difficult just to go birding. There's so much colourful history, sorts of historical forts, palaces and sites. So it's a perfect place to explore in Rajasthan, particularly to combine some birding, some wildlife, and some culture. And it's one of my favourite places, I think, to go in India, for birds especially. But I spent my honeymoon in Rajasthan, so it means a little bit to me. That was a long time ago now. Anyway, when you talk about Rajasthan, there's actually 2 main geographical areas. So the western side is mostly desert, and the eastern side is a hill range, the Aravallis. So you've got the desert specialities, grassland areas in the west, and the Desert National Park we'll talk about a fair bit coming up. Whereas the Aravallis has places like Ranthambore, so the dry deciduous forests in Ranthambore. So very, very contrasty habitat in 2 halves of the country. And you can sort of see that on this map. So it's the north and west, which is the deserty areas, and the south and east, which is the Aravallis, the forested hill ranges mostly. This is actually some of the protected areas. So just to point out, you can't see very much from that, but on the west side, that green patch, that's the Desert National Park, which is a really extensive area in Jaisalmer district, very close to the border with Pakistan. And that's how some of the habitat changes. So the Aravallis at the top, these rocky vegetated hills through grasslands, you can find with blackbuck roaming there, into the more arid deserts at the bottom. And so the way we're going to go, we're actually starting in the east or northeast, and we'll work our way westwards, which is typically where we do it on several tours. So going from Delhi down to near Jaipur, and then continuing west, and you get into the desert areas, and then south into places like Beira and Mount Abu, we'll talk about a little bit. And then often, depends how long you have, but one of the best tours to do in West India is to then keep going south and west a little bit more into Gujarat, which also has some fantastic birding, but I think maybe we'll chat about that one next week. And if you come back in towards Delhi, then you come back via places like Pushkar, which we'll talk about coming up. So one of the first places you'd get to if you're going from Delhi, Sinister National Park. And it's like many of the national parks here, this used to be a hunting preserve. It's actually been a wildlife reserve for quite a long time. And it's a fairly easy weekend getaway from Delhi. This is in the Aravallis. It has tigers. It went through a period a few years ago where there were no tigers, thanks to the poaching there. A few have been relocated, and now there is a population of tigers. You have a reasonable chance of seeing tiger, but it's just a lovely park generally. Other wildlife, some good birding, and as much of Rajasthan. Dotted around are the old ruined forts and palaces and things. So this is part of the sort of landscape around Sinister. This one, I think, taken quite late in the year, during and post monsoon. Wouldn't quite be this colour now, but it's well vegetated, this area. And of course, that's one of the things we're looking for. We're going to talk very little about tigers today, but we can always talk plenty about them some other time. But Sinister is one of the good places for it, and then otherwise Ranthambore is nearby, although we're not going to go there on this particular session, but where many of you, including me, saw their first tigers, I expect. Leopards, though, we'll cover a little bit more. There's leopards dotted throughout much of this part of Rajasthan, including one or two very good places to see them. So Sinister is one which has quite a good chance. But the commonest cat you're likely to find in most places of India actually is the jungle cat, especially these two cute jungle kittens. But it would be the commonest cat to be found on safari. But when I say common, it still means not that often. So birds in this sort of area, quite a lot of Rajasthan is particularly good for raptors. So here, this is a white-eyed buzzard. Doesn't have a white eye, you say? Yep, no, it doesn't. This is a juvenile, and the adults have the white eyes. Juveniles have this just a brownish coloured eye. But it's interesting, white-eyed buzzards can congregate in huge numbers post the monsoon, attracted by partly by insects and then some reptiles. So locusts, for example, we had a big locust swarm last year rather. And you can get hundreds, even thousands of white-eyed buzzards, mostly juveniles, all congregating in parts of Rajasthan at this time. Other parts of the year, it's still a bird you can come across in ones or twos in these arid areas. Next raptor, when perched, is actually pretty similar looking, generally. Looks fairly similar in plumage, but this is a Benelli's eagle, a resident raptor of a lot of the rocky areas around in Rajasthan. And owls tend to be a feature wherever you go in India. We're blessed with many species of owls, a lot of which can be seen in the daytime. So Indian Scops owl is heard at night in many of these places and quite often can be found in the daytime. So this is sort of typical, again, in this case, post-monsoon or during monsoon type safari through Sinister. And quite a lot of these safaris, although you can't walk, which is sometimes frustrating for birding, but in a slow jeep, open jeep like this, the birding can be surprisingly good very often. And here's some of the forts and palaces. This is in Sinister. They also have another of the old ruined forts. You can wander around and also see good birds. It looks like excellent for brown rock chats and dusky crag martins. And a lot of the old palaces here, this Sinister Palace, have now been converted into hotels. So some quite luxurious ones, some more reasonable, but there's lots of very interesting heritage hotel properties. This is also near Sinister Lake, where again there's a palace which is now a hotel. So then you continue a little bit further, heading sort of south and west, and get to Jaipur. Jaipur, of course, is extremely famous for sightseeing generally. But what's remarkable for us birders and wildlife fans is the Jalana Safari Park. This is right on the edge of the city. It's a very small reserve, but it probably has the densest population of leopards anywhere in the country. And it's a fantastic place to go. In fact, it's such a good place that even if you were a non-birder and you were doing a tour around of Jaipur, Delhi, Agra, these sort of things, it's easy to go and do an afternoon safari or morning safari in Jalana. And the chances of seeing leopards there are actually very good. It's also quite good to see hyenas there, and various other wildlife. The birding is very good. The last time I went there, I went to partly hoping to see a Eurasian scops owl that had been reported, which winter very rarely in northwest India. And I didn't see it, but I went a couple of times over a week's period, and I saw it the second time, but it wasn't an Eurasian scops owl. It was actually a pallid scops owl, which actually is more common in India than Eurasian. So I was slightly disappointed, but most of our European friends would be very happy with that. So this is the sort of habitat of Jalana. You can drive around. There's a group of nilgai in here, or nilgai or blue bull, which is the largest Asian antelope. And you'll notice that the recently planted trees here are surrounded by fencing, and that's to protect them from being eaten by the nilgai, which actually is a pest in some parts of India. They tend to raid crop fields and are not really a friend of farmers. There was a period a couple of years ago where it was actually officially declared vermin in 1 or 2 states and legal to hunt them. I think that's stopped now, but nilgai you can find dotted throughout a lot of North India, even in some of the more desert areas. And of course, the Jalana leopard. And hyena, as I said, this is one of the best places to see striped hyena, which is the one we get in India. It actually occurs throughout North Africa as well, although when you watch your African wildlife films, it's usually the spotted hyena in East Africa is the one you see. But yeah, very difficult to see in India. Parts of Rajasthan and parts of Gujarat are probably the best place to see hyena. One nice bird of these dry, rocky hillsides is the Circia malcoa. Not very easy to see, not very easy to predict where you can find them. Blue-faced malcoa is slightly commoner, but again, a difficult bird, but in similar habitats in these sort of thorn scrub forests. A type of cuckoo, malcoa, but it's one that actually builds a nest. And nightjars, in this case, a roosting jungle nightjar. Eurasian sparrowhawk in India is a winter visitor to these parts. So this is in Jalana, and they often come down. There's various pools in the park for animals and birds to drink, and they're great places to just sit quietly in your jeep a little way back. So you get fantastic views of sparrowhawk. Also can be very good for buntings, so white-capped buntings, grey-necked buntings as well, often come down to drink. And Indian pitta. Now, most bird watchers don't really see too many here because in this part of India they're summer visitors, but it can actually be an incredibly common bird in the summer. So very, very noisy. You can hear them very easily. It's known colloquially as the 6 o'clock bird because it tends to call at 6 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening. They're wintering in much of India, but further south typically. So in this area, there are only summer visitors. And again, Jaipur, of course, lots of historic sites. The Amber Fort, the massive fort in Jaipur. More interest, it's a spectacular place, but more interest to me would be the area just behind the Nahagar Biological Park, which is a thorn scrub forest, very good for white-naped tit, and Marshall's Iora and white-bellied minivet and a few specialities like that. But the fort is well worth a look as well. Famous site from Jaipur, the Hawa Mahal, the Palace of Winds. This was actually something that was built originally to give the royal ladies the ability to view out through the sort of lattice windows without being seen themselves, so they could spy on what was going on in the city outside. And of course, Jaipur has lots of other good sightseeing to do. The market is fun, the bustling markets, lots of good shopping, lots of good food, of course. And none of my tours would be complete without stopping for some good food, some nice street food, lots of good snacks. So kachori is a particular favourite in Jaipur. Lots of good entertainment, typical Rajasthani outfits, Rajasthani turbans. So then moving out beyond Jaipur, about 4 hours drive from Jaipur, and now we're getting to the sort of more into just the edge of the desert area. So Tal Chapa Sanctuary is an extremely interesting, very small reserve. Again, what used to be a hunting ground, the Maharaja of Bikaner in this area. It's a small area of grassland, very small actually. The main reserve itself is just 9 square kilometers, but it was set up to protect blackbuck. And it has large populations of blackbuck and a few chinkara, the Indian gazelle. And for birds, it's fantastic. It's a lovely protected grassland, attracts large numbers of raptors and larks, and is a nice, easy place to visit in the small size. Blackbuck, it's actually, blackbuck, it has about 3,000 blackbuck there now, apparently, and it's become a bit of a problem because there is no natural predators for them. So it's thought that there's about 3 or 4 times as many blackbuck as the park can really support. So the Forest Department will be looking at to relocate some of them out to other areas. But for birders, it's got some special birds as well. So Indian spotted creeper is one of the key targets here. And we had fun in November on a trip around here. Mohit was with us then, and Vivek Menon, the founder of Wildlife Trust of India, who you may have seen on a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and we were all particularly keen to see spotted creeper. It's one of the main birds there. Yellow-eyed pigeon is another one. It's a key target there, a very scarce pigeon from Central Asia, wintering in this part of the country. And then the raptors. Say it's fantastic just drive around the grassland. You can get very close to pallid and Montagu's harriers in large numbers in August, September, and then they drop off a little bit and then peak again in the winter. So you get a big harrier roost. Lager falcons are common there. And larks can be fantastic. I remember on my previous visit a few years ago, trying to count greater short-toed larks. And I think I reckoned a flock of about 5,000 greater short-toed larks. And that's one of the things for me, one of the fun things in Rajasthan is the numbers of wintering birds. So larks, buntings, smaller birds like that, as well as the raptors. So this is sort of habitat at Tal Chapa, lovely protected grassland, herds of blackbuck roaming around. And you can drive through this in your own car, slowly in parts of the sanctuary. Blackbuck jumping across the track in front of you. And chinkara, fantastic, really cute little gazelle. So spiny-tailed lizard is now quite an endangered reptile in this area. It's a major prey base for raptors. So this is one of the things that the white-eyed buzzards are looking for, as well as the locusts. We missed them in November because they were hibernating, but they've become very endangered. They are unfortunately poached as an aphrodisiac. They're boiled, their tails in particular, to produce some oil, and it's used as an aphrodisiac. So it's a major conservation project there to try and educate people and prevent this happening. But if you go and slightly later in the winter, you see all the spiny-tailed lizards coming out after hibernation. And they're quite an amazing reptile. This one, of course, we chose a picture that doesn't show its spiny tail, so you'll have to come and see one in person for that. But there's the spotted creeper. It's almost exclusively found on these trees, Kidgeri tree or prosopis, and very thinly distributed. So even in the known areas, there'll be a pair in quite a large area. And so we wandered around Tal Chapa 2 or 3 times in the right area, failing to find them when we were there in November. I decided to go on with part of our group to our next place, and Mohit and Vivek decided they really, really needed to try one more time. And then when we met up later in the day, they showed us this fantastic video of spotted creeper. So on the same tree we'd been looking at that morning. So not an easy bird. It's an endemic in India, and it's undoubtedly declining. Although in the recent State of India's Birds that was produced to look at trends of nearly all of India's birds over the past 20, 30 years and more recently, we didn't have enough data. So it's actually data deficient. It's not really known the status of it, but it's disappeared from many places it used to be. You used to find it in Bharatpur 20, 30 years ago, but it's no longer seen there. So undoubtedly declining, and always a highlight of a trip to this area. So like a tree creeper, as you can see, but unlike tree creepers, it doesn't use its tail to prop it up against the tree. Its tail is always away from the trunk. Another target bird for us is Stoliska's bushchat, or white-browed bushchat. Very little known bird. It's seen mostly in northwest India, so Rajasthan, Gujarat, occasionally reaches as far as Delhi, but it's not known where it breeds. It's thought that it does breed in desert areas, but no one's actually found it breeding in the Desert National Park or areas like that. Maybe it's a bit further west into Pakistan or elsewhere, but as yet, still no one's actually found out. But it can be seen in places like Tal Chapa almost all year round, but it still disappears for a while, and it's never been found to breed there. It also does this amazing display, known as the puff and roll display. And I don't know any other small bird that does anything similar. But on the ground, it leans back, leans its head back and puffs its chest out, and then sort of shakes side to side. I'll do a slight impression, but it's quite an amazing display that it does during the winter as well. So it doesn't seem to be just a breeding display. It's maybe some kind of territorial display, but a fascinating bird, and another one that you hope to see Tal Chapa being one of the best places for them. Lager falcons are excellent around Tal Chapa. You can see plenty of them usually. And harriers, both pallid and Montagues, marsh harriers as well, and occasionally hen harrier, which is scarce in India. But so you can see 4 harriers here if you're lucky. Some of the local women. There's something about the desert areas. I think I made a comment that the last couple of webinars I've done, we've concentrated on colourful birds, where actually Rajasthan, most of our key birds are not so colourful. They're more browns and blacks and greys. But the people are. The people are incredibly colourful in the desert. So it's a colourful state. So here's some of the black bucks, and the photographic opportunities you get here are incredible. There we have on the left, that's Salil, who was with us, who was got completely the wrong lens on for this chinkara, so he couldn't get a good photograph because it also was so inquisitive it actually ended up walking straight up to him. And there on the right we have Salil and Vijayaditya stalking a white-rump vulture. This part of Rajasthan is also very culturally rich. You have some of this is the Shekhawati region, and there are many havelis, these old buildings which are sort of palatial homes built by some of the merchants who profited. The silk trade went through this area, so a lot of merchants got very rich and built their sort of palatial homes full of interesting frescoes and murals on the wall, many of which are abandoned. So it's quite a sight to walk around some of these villages where there's 100-year-old paintings on the walls of these homes. And again, some of these are now converted into hotels you can stay in. And a bit more street food, of course. This was us enjoying pakoras for breakfast at Tal Chapa. So moving on again, And when I mentioned on our trip that we split up briefly because that was because a few of us wanted to get to Bikaner. Outside Bikaner is the Jawbear Vulture Conservation Reserve, and we wanted to get there before dark, so we had a little bit of time there, and not just the following morning. So we did one night stay here. So Bikaner again has lots of interesting sights to see. Not that we did any of them this time; we concentrated on the birds, but it's well worth a couple of days if you're interested in doing some culture as well. But the Vulture Conservation Reserve was our main target. So it's actually a carcass dump, something there used to be many of in Rajasthan, and hence thousands of vultures around. But there aren't so many now. But here there's actually a big carcass dump where they dump camel and cow carcasses, and it attracts a lot of raptors, especially in the winter when we have a lot of wintering raptors around. It's a spectacular place for birding. Lots of different vultures and eagles present there. But some of the nicer sites in Bikaner include the fort, the Junagadh Palace in the centre of Bikaner as well. We have some temples to have a look at, the Kani Mata here, and the lake, and this step well going down to the tank. Yeah. We also have food, of course, as we do everywhere. This is a fantastic pile of save. So I mentioned the camels. There is a research centre. The National Research Centre on Camels is just outside Bikaner. And of course, that does mean they have a lot of camels, and when they die, they have to do something with these camels. And so they go here. This is a lovely site, isn't it? I'm sure you all want to come here. This is should be a highlight of Rajasthan, I think, on all cultural trips. This is the Jawbear Vulture Conservation Reserve. And it's a shame that we can't have smell on webinars, because this was actually from my previous trip several years ago. And I think they just dumped a load of carcasses. So it was, strangely enough, a much more pleasant place this time. But you can see dotted around on the trees behind, those are a mix of griffon vultures and steppe eagles. The numbers of raptors that hang around here are phenomenal. Egyptian vultures into the several thousands, 4,000 or 5,000 quite commonly. Steppe eagles, maybe up to 1,000 steppe eagles sometimes. Eurasian griffons similarly. Himalayan griffons, a lot come down as well. Plenty of cinereous vultures. Here's a Eurasian in front and a Himalayan griffon behind. You can see the big size difference. It's very obvious in this picture. And also the Himalayan griffon is a young one. The dark plumage with the pale streaks is quite distinctive. Cinereous vulture is a really impressive vulture present here, quite easy to see in small numbers. And steppe eagles. So steppe eagles are actually a little bit like vultures in that they're scavengers majorly, so you can get congregations of many hundreds here. A few imperial eagles as well, eastern imperial eagle. Here, a juvenile again. There's a heavily streaked underparts. There's another really spectacular large eagle. And I mentioned before, one of the key birds here, yellow-eyed pigeon. So yellow-eyed pigeon is a Central Asian bird, winters in northwest India, but in very, very few places now, almost exclusively in Rajasthan. And there are only really 2 or 3 places that reliably see them. When I say reliably, it's not too often. Tal Chapper is one, but we just saw 2 birds when we got to Tal Chapper. Around Jaisalmer a little bit, but this is by far the best place to see them. You can see in this that, although it's similar to feral pigeons, you see how pale most of the wing is, with a dark border to the primaries and secondaries, and a very pale rump and back. So actually in flight, they're quite distinctive. And when we arrived at Jawbear on this last trip, we arrived about 4 o'clock or so in the afternoon, so it was getting a little bit late. And immediately we arrived, we saw a flock of these flying in the distance. And there was about 20 of them flew past, and presumably going to roost somewhere. And then a few seconds later, I saw another small flock went past. And so as we were there, I noticed flock after flock went through. So I sort of started counting them roughly, whilst trying to look at other birds there, and not just wanting to count pigeons going past, but in about 40 minutes, I think I counted 3,600 yellow-eyed pigeons flying past, which is phenomenal numbers for such a scarce bird now. And there they are. There's some of them the following morning, resting on wires. It was very nice views in the morning after they'd been roosting. But strangely, this is not something I've ever noticed about feral pigeons. They seem to sit one pigeon width apart on the wires. Not quite sure the reasons for that, whether it's a social distancing thing they're adopting at the moment. But you have several hundred on the wires here, and all a neat distance apart for some reason. So if anyone knows why they might be doing that, do send a message in the chat. And do feral pigeons ever do it? I haven't noticed. But there we are. That's the end of the day at Jorbia. A nice little identification test for you as well. Three raptors, 3 different head shapes. So they're fairly easy to identify, actually. The Egyptian vulture in the middle is quite clear with this sort of shaggy crest that one has. And on the left is definitely an Aquila eagle. And on the right is the bare neck of a vulture. So it's a steppe eagle and a Eurasian griffon, actually. But for photographers, it's a fantastic place. You come in the afternoon and birds are flying low and coming in, and you get some brilliant flight shots. So moving on, after you leave the beautiful surrounds of the Jorbia carcass dump, you go to another spectacular bird experience, but much more pleasant surroundings for this one. Kichan is about 4 hours or so away from there, heading west again, so further out to the desert. So Kichan itself is a fairly small village, but it's famous for Demoiselle Cranes, a Central Asian bird. They breed mostly a lot in Mongolia and elsewhere in Central Asia, and visit India in the winter. Rajasthan and Gujarat are the main wintering areas for Demoiselle Cranes anywhere in the world. There's sort of third population in East Africa, but not such large population. But in Kichan, the villagers have always appreciated the cranes visiting and have been feeding them. So they put large quantities of grain out in a small enclosure within the village. And thousands of Demoiselle Cranes come and visit, feeding in the morning and the evening when grain is put out. And then during the rest of the day, they're loafing around the deserts around. So the actual feeding is an incredible sight, an incredible sound that you can witness. And even if you're not there at feeding times, you can find thousands of Demoiselle Cranes around in the surrounding area. So it's a pretty impressive bird. It's a nice bird, it's a Demoiselle Crane. But it's even more impressive after they feed it, as one of the local villagers scattering the grain here. And this is the sort of sight you can get. Even in this relatively small enclosure, I think they sometimes have 4,000 or 5,000 cranes in here. The sight is impressive. The sound is amazing, with all these cranes honking away. And if you are there later in the day, like we were on our last trip, they're still hanging around. This is the edge of one of the lakes, just on the edge of Kichan. And again, you'll find thousands of Demoiselle Cranes that you can approach quite closely. You see, they're really not bothered by people. Moving on to probably the key place for birds and wildlife in Rajasthan, a unique area in India, Desert National Park, part of the Thar Desert. This is the famous place for great Indian bustard, as well as a lot of other difficult to see birds elsewhere. It's near Jaisalmer, which also has an incredible fort, the living fort, with plenty of people living inside the fort boundaries. So this is a really spectacular sight, and worth stopping at if you're not too desperate to try and go bustard hunting. This is part of the habitat around. They have these massive sand dunes. Really the only place in India where we have sand dunes like this. So it's quite a popular tourist spot. A lot of people get taken out on the sunset in the sand dunes. Plus birders tend to skip this little area and look for habitat a little bit more like this. This is at Sudasri in the Desert National Park. And some of these areas are fenced off, very large fenced off enclosures to keep cattle and to keep predators out, so that the bustards can breed safely. They obviously breed on the ground, and the nests are subject to being trampled by cattle or predated by foxes or crows and that, ravens, which obviously can still predate them because they can fly over the fence, but it does help somewhat. And there it is, mighty great Indian bustard, one of the heaviest flying birds in the world. Mentioned a little bit on the webinar before we had this, but there's definitely less than 150 birds in India now, and most of those are in the Thar Desert. It's really a bird that needs urgent conservation action. There's some successful captive breeding going on, which is good, but the problem is the habitat is under threat constantly. So agriculture is expanding. These grasslands are considered unprofitable wasteland. So it's protecting its habitat, which is the absolute key to its survival. I'm not sure that's really happening as well as it needs to be. So it is a bird that is seriously at risk of extinction in our lifetimes. The McQueen's bustard, you can also find around here, a smaller bustard, which is a winter visitor in this area. Again, difficult to find, again, suffered from major hunting pressures in Pakistan or Afghanistan, elsewhere. Cream-tailed coursers are quite common in the desert areas around here. So I found small flocks of these in several places. And sandgrouse. Here, a family of chestnut-bellied sandgrouse, which is the common sandgrouse. You can see sometimes hundreds, sometimes even thousands. In some years, we get visited in this area by other sandgrouse, black-bellied sandgrouse. Used to be known as imperial sandgrouse, something that was a bird that was hunted incredibly in the past. It used to be very common in Rajasthan and hunted and eaten. Now it doesn't come every year. It's not a bird I've ever seen in India, but black-bellied and spotted sandgrouse do get seen sometimes in this area. Red-tailed wheatear is a desert bird that's can be found quite nicely around the Sudasri and the other parts of the Desert National Park. Desert lark. This is almost the only place in India you can see desert lark. And another lark, which is a more obvious one, black crown sparrowhawk, quite common around here, but again, very restricted in India. It doesn't occur anywhere else apart from small areas of Gujarat, but mostly this area in Rajasthan. And hoopoe lark is another scarce bird from Rajasthan and Gujarat that you can find in this area. Trumpeter finches. We were lucky. It seems a good winter for trumpeter finches at the moment. We found a flock of 45 coming down to this pool when we were there. So, a wonderful bird. And buntings as well. It's one of the striolated bunting. Again, quite tricky to find in India. Likes these rocky areas. Asian desert warbler could be found in these areas. Has an interesting habit. Asian desert warblers do of following wheatears, desert wheatear especially. It follows them around from bush to bush. Don't quite know how it benefits from wheatears looking for food, but they seem to do that almost all the time. And in fact, when we were recently there, we saw two together, or in a very small area. One was following a desert wheatear and one was following a variable wheatear. Now, some birds that some of you watching us from Europe will be familiar with, but not quite like this. This is quite a bird I always enjoy seeing in India. The common starlings winter in northwest India. Sometimes we get large flocks, but it's always a good bird to see here. And the patterning on them is really impressive. They're a bit different to the ones you see in Europe as well. I think we get more uniform patches of sort of purple on this one or green. But they're Central Asian birds that migrate here for the winter. And another bird that I always get quite excited by is the house sparrow. It can be the commonest bird in parts of the desert in Rajasthan. It's immense flocks of house sparrows you'll find. Again, they're all wintering birds. These are migrants. They're slightly different from regular house sparrows. Pale bill tends to be very obvious. But But these again are Central Asian or maybe Kashmir breeders, but just coming here for the winter. But you'll find a small acacia can be full of 300, 400, 500 house sparrows together. The bird you would be more interested in if you're coming from Europe, and we are here too as well, sociable lapwing. Critically endangered bird. It's declined drastically in the last 20, 30 years, I suppose. Thankfully, it's a lot of work being done with it, with tagging birds in the breeding grounds in Central Asia and trying to find where they winter. We know a few winter in this area, and some of the intensive studies that have been done have turned up a lot more sociable lapwings than were feared present. So I think there was in eastern Turkey, I think a flock of 3,000 was found in the winter. So thankfully they're still hanging on, but it's a great bird, not a very easy one to see in India. And a few mammals in this area. Desert fox is fairly common. Desert cat also not quite so easy to see, but you can often see them in this area. As you wander through the grasslands here, this is a couple of bird watchers who are with us. Vijay Aditya on the left side has provided some of the photos that we've used in this presentation. Some of you may know him in India. He's just published a book. He was at the Doom School and published a book last year, I think it was, on birds of Chungbag, the campus of Doom School. So a very promising young birder with his father there, who are from Rajasthan. So they came with us on this trip, but I think they probably knew the area better than we did. These are some of the huts the villagers live in this area. Again, extremely colourful in the desert. Although we didn't meet anyone quite jumping into song and dance with their camel when we were there. So then, after leaving Desert National Park, one of the options is to head south. And Beira is a place that's become popular in the last few years. And again, it's mostly because of leopards. It's an interesting place, and again, the edge of the desert and the Aravalli Hills, but much more arid, rocky area than somewhere like Jalana. Some other good birds in this area include rock bush quail, it's a difficult bird to find elsewhere, Indian eagle owl, white-bellied minivet. And this is some of the habitat here, so rocky areas where you'd be scanning for leopards. It's a brilliant place and brilliant habitat to come across a leopard. Here's the rock bush quail, difficult bird to see, much easier post-monsoon time. So parts of this area of Rajasthan are not really visited in the summer. It becomes really too hot and uncomfortable. But post-monsoon, when it's green and a lot of the birds are active, becomes a time to see some of the birds like rock bush quail, which you can't really find very easily in winter. The Beira area is one area where they are seen quite regularly, as is Indian eagle owl. Ashy crowned sparrow-like lark. This is the common counterpart of the black crowned we saw earlier. Again, very arid areas, but found through a lot of India. Crested buntings are a lovely bird to find in this part of the world. And this is a sort of landscape of Beira. So you go on a jeep safari here, and then you have lots of scanning to do of these rocky hillsides to look for leopards. Traffic jams can be quite a problem, but otherwise you don't meet too many cars in this area. And then you can actually, in this area, you can also go and visit some of the villages and try your hand, for example, at making some clay pots for drinking tea out of, kular. This is the fantastically recyclable clay pots. Then on, not far from Beira, you continue on to Mount Abu, which is a very different part of Rajasthan. It's a hill station, and it's always been a popular place to get away from the oppressive heat lower down. Again, there's Mount Abu Wildlife Sanctuary, has a few good animals. So leopards, again, and here sloth bears are seen quite regularly. But for birders, there's one bird in particular that you have to visit Mount Abu for. This is the sort of area. It doesn't look much like Rajasthan, or the views you typically see of Rajasthan. And this is why, as a birder, you come to Mount Abu. green of Aduat. This is the only place that it is reliably seen in India. There's scattered sightings elsewhere, but it's endemic. It suffered very much because of being captured for cage bird trade. So when there are some sightings elsewhere in India, there's sometimes thought they might just be escaped cage birds. So it's Mount Abu is almost the only place to go to see green of Aduat. Some other nice birds around here. White Nib Woodpecker, which is fairly widespread in these areas, but difficult to see. Indian scimitar babbler. I think I mentioned this one last week when we were down in the Western Ghats. This is the very northern extremity of its range. We're not in the Western Ghats here, but the hills continue up to about Mount Abu. So there's a few species that are more regular in South India that just about reach up to this area. The black eagle, as I've seen, spot-breasted fantail reaches up this area as well. And sloth bear, as I mentioned, can you see now. So there's nice trekking up through the hills to get away from the heat a little bit. And this is one of the forts at Mount Abu. And so then from Mount Abu, you're very close to Gujarat border. It's not too far to go down to Ahmedabad. So that was what we originally thought we might take you on this particular session, but realized there was so much to do. So maybe next week we'll continue on down to Ahmedabad and the Little Run of Kutch and the Great Run of Kutch and other fantastic sites in Gujarat. But for now, we'll work our way back, heading towards Delhi a little bit and via Pushkar. So Pushkar is most famously known for its camel fair, or its livestock fair in the autumn, which is an enormous fair for if you want to go and buy a camel or buy some cattle or something. It's also unusual in India. It has a temple which is dedicated to Lord Brahma. There's very few temples to Lord Brahma. Now the most significant thing for particularly my European friends, that means that it's a particularly religious place and you can't get meat or alcohol. So, but as we're about to see, the birding is very good, so I think you can survive one night. This is a sort of habitat around Pushkar, so this is now back into the Aravallis and these vegetated rocky hillsides, with one of the key birds being white-naped tit, a bit like a great tit or cinereous tit, but completely black and white. And a bird really of this sort of habitat in Gujarat, Rajasthan mostly, but also found in some parts of South India, but extremely difficult to see there. So Pushkar area is probably the best place, as well as some places in Gujarat. White-bellied minivet is another of the key targets around here. We saw that in a couple of places when we randomly explored nice-looking habitats. They're actually probably more widespread than you think, but a lot of this area isn't really visited, and many of these areas have never had any birding done. White-bellied drongos occur in this area. This is a juvenile. You can see the sort of yellowish gape that it has, and a wing bar, and some sort of scruffy feathers on the breast, just the shafts of the feathers. Yellow-crowned woodpecker is another sort of acacia thorn scrub woodpecker mainly. The Indian golden orioles, quite common. And this is part of the Pushkar fair. Quite an impressive place to be, and if you're into photography, there's plenty of good photographic opportunities here. And plenty of good food opportunities, of course. A nice pile of jalebis there, which if anyone again is coming on a trip here, that will be our breakfast on the road in a few days, I think. And there's the temple by Lake Pushkar. And then finally, we're heading back to this is the last place we'll cover today, Ajmer and Songkalia. Now, for birding, these are actually well known for visiting post-monsoon, or during the monsoon and just after. It's a fantastic sort of 2-3 day trip from Delhi, but The reason it is popular is it's one of the best places to see lesser florican, bird that's extremely difficult to see anywhere in India now, but they display in the monsoon times and post-monsoon. And there it is displaying. It's an amazing display. They leap vertically out of mostly in crop fields where they're not visible. They're the crop is too deep, so you can't see them on the ground at all. But it's at this time of year when the males display, and they do this leap or a series of straight up and down leaps, calling. Now a critically endangered bird. It winters throughout India, but you can never really see it. I've never seen one. I've not been to Songkalia, unfortunately, because that was hit by the pandemic travel restrictions, so we couldn't get there in September. That's what it looks like if you can find one close by. There's some other good birds here, and these are again like monsoon birds, difficult to find other times of year, but here for a couple of months are actually quite obvious. So rain quail. This is a male with all the black on the breast and around the head. If you see a female, it's almost identical to a common quail, so extremely difficult to identify, but mostly difficult to identify because you never see them very well. Painted francolin, again, bird that's extremely difficult to find at some times of the year, and then very easy at this time when they'll call, and often from a prominent perch like this. Red-necked falcon or red-headed merlin is a sort of open country bird that's found throughout the country, but this is one quite good place to see it, not common anywhere. And Indian bushlarks are common here, as is singing bushlark, which is if you read the guide, it's supposed to be relatively common in areas, but it isn't seen very often at all. It's common here, again, if you come July, August, September, October time maybe, and then they seem to disappear. No one seems to know they should be resident, but they're almost never seen at other times of the year. But if you're here in this monsoon time, there's a few good birds that us Indian birders are looking for all the time, because the northwest of India attracts some passage migrants that you don't see at other times of the year, and you don't see in other parts of the country either. Rufous-tailed scrub robin is one of the key ones to see. Can be fairly easily found in sort of August, September time in parts of Rajasthan and Gujarat. But it's also the time when we get really excited by looking out for spotted flycatcher and greater whitethroat, some fairly common birds for European birders. European nightjar also at this time of year. European rollers can be extremely common in northwest India at this time of year, much, much more common than Indian rollers. So it's an interesting time to visit. But that's the typical thing you need to do when you're in Songkalia. Stand around looking over these fields, hoping and waiting for a florican to jump out in front of you, and hoping it's doing it in front of you and not behind you. So this is where we'll undoubtedly be in this year, like in August and September, hoping we can find a few there. Okay, and that's time to take a breath. I think that was a long trip we did through Rajasthan. Thanks very much everyone for watching. Please do send some questions if you got them, and I must thank all the photographers who've sent us some great pictures to use here. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. This was absolutely brilliant.
I don't know how we thought, first of all, we were going to do Gujarat as well.
Yeah, we couldn't have accomplished it. So we've got a reason to get everybody on board, next week, same time, 7:30, when we're going to go live again for Gujarat. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be another magic happening. And Mike, this is absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all enjoyed yourselves. And if you did not enjoy, I wouldn't believe you. Okay. So, so my deepest gratitude to all the photographers who contributed to this beautiful presentation. I think the key to a good presentation are great photos, because they sensitize people who are watching. And
I must just just looking through the questions. I see L. Armstrong has asked if I took the photos.
Oh, yeah.
I took the bad ones. The good one, if it was a good photo, it wasn't one of mine. I can guarantee that.
Okay, so I think there are people asking questions, so maybe people want to head out. In the meantime, before you start answering questions, I'd like to share Mike's trip report and another document that my office prepared for you all to take away. That's got all the information of all those slides that you saw in a PDF form. So you can always, there's some sort of document that you can always store with you and make use of as you go along whenever you're planning a trip ahead. I am going to share these two documents. So here comes Rajasthan birding trip report, and the other one is birding hotspots of Rajasthan. You go ahead and download these files, and Mike, over to you to answer any questions that you can see in the chat.
Yeah, I'm impressed by the number of food tips that have come in on the questions. So that's great. Thanks. Yeah, if in Pushkar must try mirchi wala. Oh yeah, green chili, fried green chilies. I had that last time. They were very good. So. Let's look for questions. I see you answered one about the length of this tour. I mean, we didn't really follow a tour here. We sort of there's so many different itineraries possible for Rajasthan. There's just so much to see. So it's probably a 2 weeks typically you need. So we visited in November and we tried to concentrate on just the main highlights. And so we did about an 8-day tour. We got out to Desert National Park, but really Rajasthan can't seriously be done in less than 2 weeks. And if you have more, much better.
Fantastic.
I see Kelly. Oh, nice to hear from you, Kelly. It's been a long time, been many years. But yes, I think Mohit will put the links to these webinars so you can watch them again or send them to anybody who might have missed them.
And then also, if you become a part of our community, you'll be able to see these files and these replay links all the time listed in these groups. And Farina has posted a link here, which you can click and then become a part of the groups, the Facebook and the WhatsApp group, where you'd find these links all the time. And
somebody asked about the perfect month to visit Rajasthan for birding, and it's a good question. I think typically I'd probably say now. I would like to be there now. January or February are probably the best months. Going into March is still good birding, but it's starting to get hot. And then through April, May, June is oppressively hot. But then again, from sort of September onwards, we have the passage migrants, and post-monsoon, the temperatures come down. November was when we last went. November, December is fantastic birding and can get pretty cold. I did New Year's Eve in the Desert National Park once, and it was extremely cold in the desert there. But yeah, perfect time is probably now. January, February is for the best all-round birding and wildlife.
Great. So Diego, you need to contact us next time you come into Rajasthan or anywhere in India for bird watching. Don't worry about that. And also, Mike, February is a good time after mid-Feb for spiny tail lizard when it starts to come out.
Yes, yep.
And there's more activity in the park, and there's more activity. So spiny tail lizard is that area where you usually would find the spotted creeper that's being protected with the help of Wildlife Trust of India. And Wildlife Trust of India is conducting a white-winged duck survey, trying to find new habitats or trying to find this bird in different habitats from the ones already known. And those who are interested in participating in these surveys, type yes, or just type WWD, and we know that you're interested, and we will be contacting you separately to help this project. Yeah. So this is.
Diego mentioned he was in Rajasthan last year, and no one offered a birding tour. There's no advertising at all of these activities. And yeah, I think that is the case. If you're traveling around Rajasthan, it's clearly a tourist hotspot in India. There's so much to see, but birding doesn't really get the focus. If you're there in the Desert National Park, you get touts in jeeps coming up to you, trying to offer you tours of the desert and promising you things. But no, generally they'll show you a desert view, but they won't know the birds. There are some really good guides, but it's not really obvious, I guess. If you look on our websites, you'll find a few mentions. But for example, in Desert National Park, there's an NGO recently has been training quite a lot of the locals to work on bustard protection. So they're monitoring bustards themselves. They're monitoring any illegal activities in the area. And we took a local guy with us on our trip for a couple of days, and it's fantastic. It's the community bustards are only going to survive with communities appreciating that the birds can actually give them something as well, give them an income through the tourism. And so we usually use a local. But yes, it's not someone. If you're just traveling around in Rajasthan, you wouldn't find these things. You wouldn't notice these things, I think. But hopefully you get a chance to come again, Diego.
Yeah, I think that conservation organization is doing fantastic work in Jaisalmer, in Desert National Park, and so is the gentleman in Kitchen, who's spending his entire life. He's dedicated his entire life to saving Demoiselle Cranes, and he requires constant help. And he has secured a lot of help, and he's managed to convert that place into some sort of protected status. And Kitchen is the key area. Like Gary is asking, are demoiselle cranes seen in large numbers in February? So yes, they're still there.
Yeah, it's probably the peak month, I would think. Probably got the largest numbers in late January, February.
Yeah. And that's how it is. So I think it's just been a beautiful webinar, and people want to know more, and we've got so much to share, and we've got so much to learn from everybody else also, Mike. So I'm happy to invite others to come and co-host with us, and then talk about any sort of natural history experiences that they've got with them, and they want to tell the world more about birds and animals. Please feel free to drop a message to me or to Mike, and we'll be happy to have you online talking about your experiences. People want to hear us, and we want to hear people as well. So this is a great exchange time. I'll tell you, COVID has done great wonders, bringing people together as well, online. So thanks to our Corona times, where we developed capacity to be at this place where I don't have to travel and he doesn't have to travel, but we still transport people into different experiences into different parts of the world.
Yeah. I've just touched on places there. I mean, most of those places could have had a whole session on themselves. In Desert National Park, there's so much information. Untitled Chapter, which is an incredible sanctuary for its size.
Yep. So Diego, you can just click on that link which Fareed has posted, and you can become a part of our Facebook group, and you'd be able to connect with everybody there, Mike and a whole lot of birders who are there, and then seek information as you go along. You never have to be, you don't have to be alone when it comes to birding in India. You'll always find company. Great. So you're interested in bats, fantastic. And yeah, we have some bat experts in India, and I could invite one of them to come and talk to us about bats. And if you can Jolie, if you are interested in bats and if you want to talk about bats, no problem whatsoever, just join us, and then we could do a session.
I remember a few years ago I went to Sariska. I actually went to Sariska with my young daughter and her cousin. So just the three of us went, and we explored a couple of the forts near Sariska. Just randomly, with no one else there, we found some on the map, and they were full of bats inside. Not sure what species they were there, but yeah, there's a few there. But I think the Uttarakhand area, if you go up into the hills a little bit more, has a lot more diversity in bats. I'm no expert, but as Mohit said, there are. So maybe we could arrange someone to have a chat sometime.
Fantastic. So this Sunday, coming Sunday, I've got Deepak Dalal, who is a great storyteller, and he's a storyteller for children, and he tells you how to have real call to actions, for children. When children want to know about conservation, they want to know about birds, but then in the evening, you'd be able to join that session, and then Mike and I come back with Gujarat to you. and there'll be another area. You know, Mike. So we'll have a lot more mammals there and birds of pass.
Yeah. There's sort of, again, fantastic variety.
Okay. I think we are 10 minutes over. We were supposed to wind up at 8:30. Now it's 8:40. So shall we say goodbye to everyone and hope to see everyone again next week, same time, and on Sunday as well if possible. Great.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Namaste. Thanks.